Hi there. I'm just going to do a very short lesson. It will be short on the last part of equivalent dose rates. I'm calling this equivalent dose rate part 2. And these are numbers that you need to remember. You could be asked to quote these numbers. So what this is really about is how much radiation do people get, should they get. I've been talking about 2.2 millisieverts in the past, and I want to once again remind you what that 2.2 millisieverts is. So I've got a title, Equivalent Dose Rate Part 2, numbers to remember, and I'm going to start with members of the public. That's people like you, anybody who's generally walking down the street who is not a radiation worker or who doesn't work in a hospital involved in x-rays or dentists or anything like that. So members of the public are just plain ordinary people who don't normally have anything to do with radioactivity. So members of the public. Now this is an average figure, this 2.2 millisieverts. It could be a little bit higher, could be a little bit lower, and one pupil said they'd looked this up and the number on an NHS website was given as 2.2 to 2.7, which is probably right, but there's only one number that the SQA wants you to remember for members of the public. So the average equivalent dose for a member of the public, and this is really due to background radiation only. So it's stuff that you'd encounter without even knowing about it, and you're not working with radiation. So the average equivalent dose and this is a UK figure. Other countries have got different limits, but you'll be sitting your exam National 5 in the UK, so we're going to use UK figures. The average equivalent dose due to background radiation in the UK is 2.2 millisieverts in a year. So the average equivalent dose rate is 2.2 millisieverts per year. Remember, rates to do with how often, and we're doing it in a year. The equivalent dose rate is 2.2 millisieverts per year. So I'm just writing there in a year at the end, and I'm calling it a rate. Now, depending on your job, if you're a dentist, for instance, if you are giving people x-rays, you might expect, or if you're receiving x-rays, then you might expect that to be a little bit more. So in addition, so if you went as a member of the public, you might get extra, apart from the background radiation. You went to the dentist, you might get extra, and you're allowed to have in a year 1 millisievert. So that would make 3.2 millisieverts if you went to hospital and had an x-ray. Right, now lastly, so that's one number you need to remember, is 2.2 millisieverts in a year. If you go and have some x-rays, dental x-rays, hospital x-rays, add an extra 1 millisievert. But somebody who works in the radiation industry, and by people who work in the industry, I mean people who work in power stations, for instance. If you're doing research work in a university or a lab, and your specific job says you shall use radiation, then this number isn't 2.2, it's much bigger, and in fact it's 20 millisieverts. So the last figure of the three for a radiation worker. Somebody in a power station, in a hospital, because you're working with it all the time if you're involved in giving people x-rays or radiotherapy. So hospital and research, specifically with radioactivity, is 20 millisieverts per year. So these are the three numbers you need to remember. Anybody just walking down the street who never goes near a hospital or a dentist, 2.2. In addition, an extra 1 if you go and get some x-rays or something like that, then that would take you to 3.2. And lastly, if you work in a power station, I think physics teachers come into this group as well, because we work with radiation. We have radioactive sources in the school. If you're going to work with radiation, then the limit is 20 millisieverts per year. And those are legal limits. And certainly if you were using a radiation badge and it was in a hospital and it was found that you were getting 30 millisieverts in a year, then somebody would be going into the hospital to find out why is it so much more dangerous in your hospital than in others, because you shouldn't be receiving that. Obviously, the more radiation you receive, the worse it is. So it's answerable to in law. And I've already mentioned that Highland Council will have to adhere to this level in a school by putting in radiation detectors to find out if schools that are built in different areas with different types of rock, granite rock is particularly radioactive, they'd have to make sure that it's not bigger than 2.2 millisieverts. And we've talked about what happens in some schools. In Highland, they found it a little bit bigger than that, and so they put extra ventilation in, because most of the radioactivity in buildings is traveling around in the air. So if you have a pump and good ventilation, you can pump the air out. You can change the air very often, bring in air from the outside when it's much fresher, and you won't exceed that figure. Right, that's all I'm going to do on that, and it's to highlight these three figures, which you must remember as numbers because they're not written down anywhere for you.